Hello, this is Sathya Devadoss. This video is about biped walking robots using the Git algorithm. I have assembled 2 legs and a hip as part of this project. The left leg has 3 servo motors and the right leg also has 3 motors. The 2 legs are assembled separately and joined by the hip connector. The motors are connected to Arduino using a servo shield, and we are using a 16-channel Servo Driver shield for this, which means that we can control 16 motors with this. Before assembling the legs, all motors are 0 set to 90 degrees. This step is important. In the loop method, we go through 6 steps to move various motors according to the Git algorithm to simulate human walking patterns. This is how a robot is going to act. Here we've got 1 foot, an L clamp, 3 multi-purpose clamps, 3 U clamps, 3 motors, 3 horns, and then we've got the screws being 6 cup bearings, 6 M3 lock nuts, 30 M3 screws 6 millimeters, 30 M3 screws 10 millimeters, 30 M3 nuts, 24 M4 screws, and 24 M4 nuts, 4 M3 flat, and then we've also got 1 long U-clamp. On the other side, we have the rest of the materials: 1 foot, 1 L-clamp, 3 multi-purpose clamps, 3 U-clamps, and 3 motors. Here we've got the rest of the screws. This is all the materials we will be using for our machine. Here's all the machinery we will be using. Here's the Arduino, the energy source, and finally the shield, which needs extra energy, so it comes with the USB. As you can see, this side is flat, but the other side have crater-like holes in them. As you can also notice, there are 4 holes on one side and another 2 on the other. First step, we're going to be using the foot, but only the flat side first. We're going to use a multi-purpose clamp and put it right on top of the 3 holes to make it match. We're going to use these little hinges and make sure they're facing the 4 dot side. So it's time to put in the screws. We're going to flip it around and look at the crater side. So we're going to put the M3 screw inside the crater after aligning it perfectly. As you can see, we are putting the screws inside the craters. Now we'll be using an M3 nut and tighten it to make sure it doesn't get loose. Afterwards, it's time to tighten it with a nose plier, holding the nut and then screwing the screw under it to tighten it well. This should be your final result. Now that that's done, we will be taking a U-clamp. And instead of an M3 6mm, we're going to take an M3 10mm screw, along with a cup bearing. We're also going to take a lock nut. Now, grab your 3M 10mm screw. Now, put it into the middle hole on the right side, facing you. Okay, now grab your U-clamp and your cup bearing and insert it into the big middle hole. Now, put it behind the wall, but make sure it's in front of the hinge and insert it into the screw. Then grab your lock nut and put it in. Now it's time to tighten it with a nose plier and the screwdriver. Make sure it's flexible and can turn like this, or else you might have done something wrong. After this, I recommend labeling them left and right. I have it so the left one is the one we've built so far, and the right one is the one we still have to do. Now, we're going to do the same thing we did to the left one to the right one. With the same M3 screws and the M3 nuts, putting the multi-purpose clamp on, aligning it with the three big holes in the middle, and the 4 big holes in the front, with the flat side on top. Once again, we are going to put the empty screws through the crater holes on the bottom. Now it's time to tighten all the screws and nuts. Now it's time to use the 3M 10mm screw, but instead of doing on the right side, we're going to do it on the left side middle, compared to the left one where we put it on the right side. Now it's time to get the U-clamp along with the cub bearing. We're going to put inside the hole and put it in front of the wall, and make sure the other side is behind the little hinges. And then we're going to use a lock nut and screw it in. Now we are going to tighten the screws. Okay, now we're going to go grab ourselves a motor and one of the horns. Now we're going to attach the horns in a cross pattern. Make sure it's in a cross pattern and nothing else. Then we're going to use an M3 screw and screw it right in the middle. After it looks like that, we're going to put inside the foot. We're going to locate the sides of the motor and make sure they're on the outside of the hinges on the top of the foot. Make sure the horn is facing the big hole on the U-clamp side. Now we'll be using M3 6mm screws and fill in those holes next to the horn and the U-clamp side. Now, we're going to focus on the hinges on the side of the motor. We're going to first get ourselves some M4 screws and screw it on the front of the foot where the big 4 holes are. Now we're going to use M4 nuts and screw them on the back to secure the screw. Time to do the other side. Now we're going to tighten all the screws on the hinges. Now we are done with the left leg. Okay, now it's time to do the right leg. We're going to start off with the motor and the horn. We're going to attach them diagonally like a cross. Now we're going to use the M3 6mm screws and screw one right in the middle. This should be the end result. Now, put the motor inside the foot. Make sure that the hinge on the sides of the motor are on the outside of the hinges on the foot. Now align the U clamps holes along with the motor's horns holes, and then fill them in with the black M3 screws. Okay, now you want to grab 4 M4 screws and put them inside the motor's sides. Now, go grab 4 M4 nuts and put them on the M4 screws. Now, tighten all the screws and nuts. Make sure everything is movable. This should be the final product. Now, grab the L clamp and make sure that your L clamp has one long side and one short side. You should also have 4 M3 nuts and also 4 M3 10mm screws. Now, we're going to use the L and make sure that the longer side is facing the front of the foot. So that means the 4 dots. Then insert the M4, M3 screws on the 4 circles on the L, on the short side of the L. Place the M3 nuts under the M3 screws. If the L is not shaking, that means that you did it right. Once again, we are going to take an L and make sure that the longer side is at the front of the leg, where the 4 large holes are. Again, we will be needing M3 10mm screws, and once again, put them into the holes on top on the shortest side of the L. We are then going to put the M3 nut under the M3 screw and then screw it and make sure it's tight. Now we have 2 legs with 1 motor so far. Now get 2 U-shaped clamps. Now flip one of the U-shapes and connect it to the other. Now get 4 M3 10mm screws and put it through the top U. Now use the M3 nuts and put them under the M3 screws and tighten it. Then tighten all the screws with a nose plier. This should be your final result. You're going to want 1 multi-purpose clamp. You're also going to need 1 cub bearing, 1 M3 10mm screw, and a M3 nut. Now grab your multi-purpose clamp and put the screw right in the middle of the right side where the hinges are facing you. Grab your M3 10mm screw and put it through the hole. Make sure you put it into a hole that matches and leave the multi-purpose clamp inside the U's. Now you're going to want your cub bearing. put it through the M3 10mm screw. Now grab your lock nut and put it on the M3 10mm screw to lock it in place. Now you get your nose plier and start to tighten the screw. This should be your final product. Now we're going to do it again, but this time we're going to do it for the left leg. We're going to grab two U's again and screw them in with M3 10mm screws and M3 nuts. Okay, now we're going to use a lock nut, M3 10mm screw, and a cub bearing. Now, but for the left leg, this time we're going to put the screw on the left side of the multi-purpose hinge and put it on the left side of the U's. And make sure it's still inside the U. Now use your cub bearing and put it through the M3 10mm screw. Now put the lock nut on the M3 screw too. Now tighten the screw. This is what you should get at the end, and this is how it should look like. Okay, now grab your U thing and flip it to the right. Now, remember, the side where the screw is, push it to the right. Make sure it's to the right. And then attach it like this. And look, the screw is to the right. Connect the bottom circle, the big circle, to the circle on the L. To connect everything together, we're going to use M3 screws and M3 nuts. Make sure that your multi-purpose clamp is inside the L shape. Now that we're done with the left leg, we're now going to continue on the right leg. Now we're going to start on the right side. First, we're going to flip it over and then locate the screw. But this time, we're going to make the screw face ourselves, so to the left. And make sure that the multi-purpose clamp is inside the L. Then screw with M3 screws and secure with M3 nuts. Now, grab your motor and your horn and make sure that the horn is like across to the motor. Then get a M3 screw and put it right in the middle of the motor and screw it in. Now it's time to insert the motor into the multi-purpose clamp. Make sure that the hinges on the motor are on the outside of the hinges on the multi-purpose clamp. Now get yourself M4 screws and an M4 nuts and secure them to the hinges of the motor and the multi-purpose clamp. Then tighten using a nose plier and a screwdriver. Make sure it's very tight. Now get yourself 4 M3 6mm screws and insert them into the holes that correspond to the horn on the motor. should look like this after you're done with the screws. Now we're on to the right leg. We get a motor, a horn, and an empty 6mm screw. Attach the horn to the motor in a cross shape and screw in the empty screw right in the middle. Now attach the motor to the multipurpose clamp. Make sure that the hinges on the motor are on the outside of the multipurpose clamp hinges. Now get yourself 4 M4 screws and M4 nuts and secure them to the hinges of the motor and the multipurpose clamp. Now we're going to want 4 empty 6mm screws and screw them into the holes of the horn. If you have done everything correct so far, this is what you should get your legs to look like. Okay, now it's time to start on the hip of the robot. We're going to be needing 2 multi-purpose clamps, 1 long U-clamp, 8 M3 6mm screws, and 8 lock nuts. First, we're going to locate the holes on the long U-clamp. There's some on the right and there's some one on the left. We're not going to use the middle one. The middle one on the multi-purpose clamp, that's what's going to be attached to the ones on the long U-clamp. Now we're going to insert the M3 6mm screws into all the outer holes on the multi-purpose clamp, the one in the middle. Now, after putting all the M3 6mm screws into the multi-purpose clamp's middle, now we're going to attach it to the long U clamp, but only on the left and right holes on the bottom. Then, tighten with a nose plier and a screwdriver. If you are done with the hip, it should look like this. Now we're going to use a cup bearing and a M3 10mm screw and insert it into the hole of the U, and then use the cup bearing and tighten it. Also going to need a lock nut to tighten the screw. Now, insert the multi-purpose clamp on the long U into the 10mm 3M screw, and then tighten it with the lock nut and the cup bearing. Now, get yourself a motor and a horn and attach it and make sure it's like a cross. Now, we're gonna also need 4 M4 screws and M4 nuts. We're also gonna need a few M3 6mm screws. We are going to then insert the M3 6mm screws into the horn of the motor along the other holes surrounding the horn of the motor. We are then going to use the M4 screws and the M4 nuts to secure the motor and the long U. Then tighten using a nose plier and a screwdriver. Okay, now we're going to use our M3 10mm screw and insert it into the wall of the multi-purpose clamp. Now we're going to add the leg and make sure to put it behind the screw. get yourself a motor and a horn and attach it. Make sure it's diagonal. Make sure that the motor's hinges are on the outside of the hinges on the multipurpose clamp. Now, insert the M4 screws and the M4 nuts into the hinges. And tighten it with the nose plier. Now, get yourself empty screws and screw them into the motor. This is how it should look at the end. It should also be flexible. Now we're going to connect the motors to the shield. The shield will be supporting 16 motors. We're going to use 6 for this project. So we will be using channels 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. 0 is for the left foot, 2 is for the left knee, 4 is for the left hip, 6 for the right hip, 8 for the right knee, 10 for the right foot. Now we're going to make sure that the brown wire of the motor goes to the black pin on the channel, the red wire goes to the red pin, and the orange one goes to the yellow one. First, we're going to connect the Servo Driver shield to the Arduino. We're going to put the VCC pin from the shield and going to put it to the 5-volt of the Arduino, the ground pin to the ground pin of the Arduino, SDA pin to the A4 pin of the Arduino, SCL pin to A5 pin of the Arduino. For this project, we're going to cut a USB cable and connect it to the power supply for the Servo Driver. This is the code we've used to program our walking biped robot. This is our final product after plugging it in. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next time.